The way we're supposed to study Torah is to not only read the words, interpret them, understand them, and apply them as a lesson to our daily life, but we need to actually experience them as if we were there. We have to live them, not just learn them. A very powerful example of this comes in this week's Torah portion, the portion of Vayeira. We're reading about the life of Avraham. We know by now that Avraham sacrificed his life, risked his life, to teach the world about God. How did it all begin? God calls Avraham when he is 75 years old and tells him that he has a special mission for him, which means that at that point Avraham already believed in God, was already committed to God, was already respected in the world for being a spokesman for the one true God. Only now, God had a special mission for him. The previous Rebbe's father, who was the fifth generation of Chabad leaders, was reviewing the weekly portion when the weekly portion was Lech Lecha. His son, the previous Rebbe, meaning the Rebbe's father-in-law, heard when he was a young boy, heard his father reviewing the weekly portion. Here's how he describes it. My father was reading the words, and God said to Avram. This was before God changed his name to Avraham. He was Abram, not Abraham. So it's early in Avraham's career. God calls to Abram, and he says to him, leave your home, your birthplace, your country, your birthplace, your father's home, and come to the land that I will show you. The previous Rebbe says that as a child, he heard and observed how his father studied those words, and he saw his father crying tears of pleasure. Seeing this, the previous Rebbe says, moved me to become a Baal Tshuva. I could see how the body was melting into the pleasure of godliness, or dissolving into a godly pleasure. What is happening here? Reading the words, God said to Avram, or spoke to Avram, what will determine which emotion this evokes? Assuming that it evokes an emotion. Which emotion? What would be the proper emotion? You discover that you had a grandfather named Abraham, and that God approached him. What would you feel? Well, if you were a true student of the Torah, if you're allowing the Torah to really speak to you, you're really tuned in, what emotion would you experience? Well, whatever emotion Avram experienced. You're tuning in to his experience. God spoke to him. Well, what did he feel? Put yourself into that scene, and it will determine which emotion you're going to experience. So you're not reading stuff into the text. You're letting the text speak to you. That is an amazing form of study, the truest. Let the Torah speak to you. Let the text say what is going on and flow with it. Okay, so the previous Rebbe sees his father dissolving into the pleasure of this godliness. We can there safely assume that he is reflecting Avraham's reaction to God's calling, reaching out to him. Now we're talking about the words God said to Abraham before we get to what he said. Because the very fact that God is speaking to Avraham is an experience in itself. What was Avraham's reaction to the fact that God was speaking to him? It must have been one of great pleasure, because that's what it evoked in a true student of the Torah when he was reviewing the weekly portion. Let's take that a step further. Why did Avraham experience pleasure when God called to him? Again, put yourself in Avram's place. If God called to you, what experience would you have? What feelings would that evoke? It could be awe. You could panic. You could faint. You could become skeptical and cynical. Like, who are you really? Is this a prank? So what kind of a reaction did Avraham have? Not of awe, and certainly not of cynicism. His reaction was pleasure. Why? Why would he experience pleasure? Oh, of course, hearing from God can be a pleasure, but it can also be a terrifying, humbling experience. So what determined Avraham's reaction must have been the tone of voice with which God spoke. If God spoke in an authoritative voice, it would have evoked feelings of awe and humility. If Avraham's reaction was one of pleasure, I think we can safely assume that when God spoke to Avram, it was God's pleasure. God enjoyed speaking to Avram, and that came across in the first words. And so Avram's reaction was a reciprocal pleasure. See, we're talking about somebody of a completely different caliber. Avraham was not just another guy, good guy, nice guy, charitable, friendly, spiritually advanced. We're talking about a different kind of creature. His reaction was in response to what God was feeling. That's how we're supposed to study the Torah. So the Torah is a record not only of the words, not only of what was said, it's a record of the entire experience, if we tune in. Now, at the end of this week's Torah portion, we read about the binding of Yitzchak. God comes to Avraham and says, take your son, your only son, the one you love, Yitzchak, and bring him up as an offering on an altar on a mountain that I will show you. We all know the story. Avraham goes eagerly to fulfill God's command. Yitzchak knows what the plan is, and he cooperates with equal enthusiasm. What a weird story. Of course, it's meant to impress us. Such devotion, such obedience. But isn't it a weird story? Your son, your only son, the one you love, give him up. And he's willing to do it. And the son is willing to do it. And he wasn't a baby, he was 37 years old at the time. Yitzchak. What kind of story is this? But if you experience it, if you tune in, here's what you would discover. Human nature tends towards self-preservation, the survival instinct and so on. This is true not only physically, but also spiritually. We don't want to die physically. We don't want our body to die. We don't want our spirit to die. We don't want the things we believe in, the things we are committed to. We don't want those to die either. We don't want the ideals for which we live. We don't want them to die. It's all about self-preservation. And that's why we're so concerned with what happens after death. Just gone, blank, over. Doesn't feel good. Because then, not only did my body die, but even my ideals, my purpose, I tried to achieve something. It's over when I'm over. That doesn't feel good. So here we're told a story about a very special guy who was ready to give up his life before God spoke to him, and now he's ready to give up his son after God had revealed himself to him. Here's the difference. Willing to give up your own life means giving up your physical existence. Avraham was teaching the world about the belief in one God, and the idolaters didn't like that idea. They threatened him to stop, ordered him to stop, threatening his life. He didn't stop. His own father turned him in. And he was thrown into a fiery furnace. Miraculously, the fire didn't affect him at all, not even his garments. That was a close call. So he literally sacrificed his life, and then afterwards, of course, continued to teach the belief in one God. Then, at a much more advanced age, he is told to sacrifice his son. This was like a greater challenge, a greater test, because here, his son represented everything he stood for. Yitzchak was going to be the continuation of Avraham's life project. What he lived for and was willing to die for, Yitzchak was going to continue after Avram passes away. If there is no one to continue his legacy, if no one is going to continue to teach the world about God, then all of Avraham's efforts would be reduced to nothing. He would be a memory and nothing more. So when God comes and says, sacrifice your son, it's not just a physical life that is being sacrificed, but even a spiritual life. It's interesting that the Hebrew words for self-sacrifice is mesiras nefesh, the surrender of your soul, not your body. Giving up your body is not a very unusual or rare experience. People give up their bodies, their lives, for all sorts of purposes. Romeo and Juliet. If we can't have this relationship, we'd rather be dead. Is that self-sacrifice? No, that's self-preservation. If I can't have what I want, then I don't want to be here. Or years ago, there was a monk who set himself on fire. He was burnt to death. He set himself on fire in a public square to protest the abuse of the poor in his country. Pretty impressive guy, isn't he? Not something you want to try at home. Not something recommended for everybody. But hey, quite a commitment. Would you call that self-sacrifice? For the cause. If you die for a cause that you are committed to and that you believe in, you're not sacrificing anything. You're going for the big reward. If you believe that dying physically brings you a greater reward in heaven, then you're not sacrificing. You're investing in your future. That is not a sacrifice. So when we're talking about Avram sacrificing his life to teach the oneness of God, he wasn't looking to prove a point. He wasn't looking to sacrifice himself. He wanted to stay alive and continue teaching. So it was genuine Mesiras Nefesh, not another form of self-improvement. I will give up my physical existence for an improvement in my spiritual status or whatever, reward. No, it was real. He was completely selfless. He wasn't thinking, if I die a martyr's death, I'll get more respect. People will remember me with... No. He did not want to be a martyr. So it was real self-sacrifice. However, people might not interpret it that way. People might think, well, yeah, sure. He devoted himself to a cause. He was committed to this project. Somebody tried to stop the project, and he wouldn't quit. Is that so unusual? There are people who start businesses at the risk of their life. So although Avraham's sacrifice was the real thing, where's the proof? The observer might come to the conclusion that he was like everybody else, willing to risk his life for what he believed in. So it's not a self-sacrifice, it's an intense devotion. Now God comes to Abraham years later, and he says, sacrifice your son. And please don't fail this test. Because if you fail this test, people will say, aha, so he was just a stubborn guy devoted to his own project. But now, if you sacrifice your son, it will prove to every observer that when you sacrificed your own life as a young man, it was the real thing and not a stubborn commitment to a cause. How will it prove it? Because here, the cause itself is going to die if you sacrifice Yitzchak. So what makes Avraham's sacrifice, which was a real sacrifice, what makes it unique? Throughout our history, ordinary people, not the biggest scholars, not the biggest saints, sacrificed their lives in a genuine fashion for a mitzvah. They wouldn't bow to an idol. Sadly, it was a pretty common event in Jewish history. So what was unique about Avraham? This ability to go against the natural instinct of self-preservation. If you sacrifice your life for your cause, that is self-preservation. But the ability to sacrifice your life beyond self-preservation, to go against that instinct and be completely selfless, this was not within the realm of human possibility until Avraham did it. Once he did it, he broke the glass ceiling that said human beings can't be that altruistic. You can't be that selfless. Avraham proved that you can. Well, not he proved it, he made it possible. In his own selflessness, he opened up that gate of possibility. Now, after he opened the gate, others can follow more easily. Now that it has become an event in human experience, because he was a human being, once that became the property of the human condition, other human beings, not nearly as great as Avram, can do the same thing. So you might say, Avraham was the father of all selflessness that followed in the course of history. How do we reach these insights? How do we get to understand this? Oh, my secret is this book. You read the Rebbe's talks on these Torah portions, that's what you learn. But how did the Rebbe get there? Because when you study Torah properly, you hear not only the words, not only the tone, but you experience, you live it out in your own mind and heart. You're reading about Avraham agreeing to sacrifice his son. Don't ask, what does that mean to you? What did that feel like to Avraham? Put yourself in his place. This is Yitzchak we're talking about, the son that's going to continue his legacy. If you study Torah in that way, you're actually receiving the Torah personally, as if it's being given to you. And that's the way we study the Torah. If you enjoyed this conversation or this topic, and you're looking for more information, or you want to hear it again from another angle, there is a way to do that. And that is in this book. It's all there. Order it from Amazon. You can read it, reread it, and share it.